In school, at work, when we go out to eat or to the park, we are exposed to strangers. We take for granted the sheer amount of new faces we see and interact with every day. This exposure gives many people a sensation we call social anxiety. The diagnostic criteria outlined here addresses a clinical phobia of socializing, but discomfort in socialization has become so common that we use the term colloquially. Criteria such as fear of appearances to others is highly relatable. I argue that widespread social discomfort is not pathological, but a reasonable response to the uncertainty that comes with socializing with too many strangers. This uncertainty is a result of violation of natural social structure and our difficulties in reading emotional cues. It is foundational to know that the number of superficial social interactions have increased dramatically, and that they can cause anxiety. Fear around strangers is a highly relatable experience that is happening more often, and social anxiety has been steadily increasing since 2000. The increase of fear with interaction may just be due to too many interactions. Dunbar's number claims that we have a cognitive limit for social networks that maxes at 150 people, with a certain fraction of those people being allocated to differing levels of intimacy. This diagram shows the layers of our social network described by Dunbar's number. The inner ring is our most intimate relationships, usually containing about 5 people. Moving outward, each ring becomes further removed in intimacy from the ego. This model is considered robust because it was discovered in many settings, from hunter-gatherer societies to parishes. However, this number is not holding up anymore. Average American social networks have been shown to include about 290 people. The difference is made up of weak social ties, not intimate relationships of trust. If we are making unprecedented amounts of weak social ties, then we can assume we are having more stranger interactions as well. These unnaturally high levels of connectedness have consequences for our social comfort. The size of our social groups have enlarged, but when and why? The graph from Casari 2018 shows that a community from the Alps maintained social group sizes of about 176 people per ego, in spite of an almost 3-fold increase in their population in the time period captured by the graph. It is far too simple to say that our increase in population since the mid-20th century is responsible for our social network size. To answer the question of why social networks are upsizing and when, it is due to impersonal cooperation, which has been on the rise since the 1950s, shown in a graph from a study by Yuan et al. Social norms and circumstances in our institutions promote impersonal cooperation, which is epitomized in university environments where cooperation with strangers is demanded. University attendance has been on the rise since the mid-20th century, a place where group work and note-sharing abound. Looking at this graph, we see that in 1940, about 10% of 23-year-olds had a bachelor's degree, but in 1990, about 30% had a bachelor's degree. It is not an exaggeration to say that a university student may meet or cooperate with hundreds of acquaintances in a year, which already violates Dunbar's number for the amount of weak social ties that we can handle cognitively. In summary, impersonal cooperation demanded by our institutions since the 1950s are responsible for a steady increase in our social network, with universities really epitomizing that phenomenon. I will now look deeper into why a social network of weak ties causes anxiety. The rise in stranger interaction violates our natural social structure. To touch on our strong social ties, I will synthesize the strategic cooperation paradigm and the theoretical framework about trust. We can infer that repeated interaction leads to reciprocity, which promotes the positive reputation of an ego's peer, and ultimately leads to a relational trust. Relational trust functions as a heuristic for social interactions. Within the theoretical framework of relational trust, 2 people that share it have expectations for one another, shared values and identity, and normative conventions for their interactions. So much calculated social decision-making is eliminated by a heuristic encompassing these components. To be less clinical about this, take a moment to consider the people closest to you. Without even thinking about it, can't you expect them to help you out when you ask, and when they ask for your help, you don't even deliberate about it? Aren't you aware and in admiration of their values? And isn't your relationship with them part of who you are? Also, isn't it normal for you to be completely yourself around them, and what they do is so predictably within their character? Doesn't it sometimes feel like they don't have to say much for you to understand how they are feeling? To have someone in your inner circle is to have no doubts about your interactions and to know you both have each other's best interests in mind. If we have trust, cooperation, and predictability with inner circle people, where does that leave strangers and acquaintances? If you infrequently interact with someone or interact with them just once, the reciprocity will be low in value or non-existent. You won't have an image of who they are, and there's no foundation for relational trust because of this. Without relational trust, this is replaced with a calculated relationship. You can't be sure about what they will do or say, or what you should say to them. You don't know what they are about, and you have to rely on general social conventions to know how to behave around them. Throughout all of this, you can't be sure what they are thinking or feeling simply because you just don't know them. We are anxious because we are uncertain. It is necessary to understand that interactions with outer circle people give us anxiety because there is no relational trust and no rapport and predictability that relational trust entail. To further elaborate on uncertainty with outer circle people, we must look at the interplay between socializing and emotion. There is anxiety when we meet someone new because we don't know how they will react to us or what their motivations are. And importantly, we can't actually reliably identify emotions. Pictured here are the stimuli used in Ekman et al. 1969, which established the basic emotion theory. This says that humans have a limited set of categorical emotions with respect to behaviors. The stimuli shows the 6 basic emotions and their facial behaviors. If this were the case, we would expect reading emotional cues to be effortless. However, more recent strong evidence stands in opposition to the basic emotion theory. Research has found that people are rather unreliable at identifying the 6 basic emotions from facial expressions. Not only are we imprecise at detecting emotions, but the idea of categorical emotions might not even be accurate. Facial behaviors, physiology, and neurology have been found to measure only valence and arousal, rather than categorical emotions, an idea depicted in Barrett's conceptual act theory. The conceptual act theory places arousal on a y-axis and valence on an x-axis, creating a spectrum for emotions to work around the idea of categorical emotions. Scientists have yet to reliably detect a categorical emotion at all. To further muddy emotion perception, it has been found that people need body cues and context to differentiate peak emotions, which tend to have similar facial configuration. In this figure from Aviezer et al., we see that the same facial expression makes sense on either a winning or losing tennis player, showing there isn't much distinction. Basically, humans are not as proficient as we think at identifying emotional cues. To bring this back to our inner and outer circles, when we don't know someone, there is uncertainty in what they are feeling, and we don't have any context of how they normally behave or react. To make this more concrete, I will use a real-world example that should highlight differing levels of ambiguity between inner and outer circles. Here is my friend reacting to a dramatic story I tell her. Because I know my friend, there isn't much doubt in my interaction with her. This is the face she makes whenever I tell her a story, and every time it has been an indicator of amusement. Her face is strikingly similar to this stock photo of an incredulous expression. The exact emotion of this expression is rather ambiguous, causing confusion and uncertainty. When we have little to no past encounters with someone, i.e. weak social ties, we need to navigate their emotional cues carefully, which manifests itself as anxiety. When we have to do that with a large proportion of interactions, this holds consequences for our mental health. To summarize, we are associating with our outer circle more than ever. These interactions are inherently less trustworthy and require calculating body language, which we are not so great at. What we see as social anxiety is actually just a natural reaction to when we cannot effectively identify a stranger's thoughts, feelings, emotions, or intentions. Speaking from the heart, I would hope that whoever watches this knows that they aren't fatally flawed for having stress while socializing. Throughout my life, it has felt like everyone else had a rule book that I wasn't given. They all know what to say and what others are thinking and feeling. I used to fret over it quite a bit until I came to the conclusion our vast social networks are at least a little to blame for how disorienting it is to socialize. I guess what I'm saying is to take it easy on yourself, because even if it seems like others are interfacing effortlessly, they're probably struggling a little bit too.